Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the forum to raise awareness of and hopefully to stop the evil of organ harvesting in China. The forum is brought to you by ChinaUncensored.com, a website that follows what its name says. It actually gives you uncensored news on China and gives you the news that the Chinese Communist Party doesn't want you to know. I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the evening. First off, anybody needs toilets, they're just around to your left as you go out the door. Now this evening we are going to have David Matas talk to us, and then we have Dr. Yuan Hong, who was a doctor in China up until 1997. We'll talk about his experiences in the Chinese hospital system. After that, we will have questions from the floor to either of our speakers. So I think we'll move right along. And at the end of the evening, we will have a cup of tea and coffee, and people can network and have a chat if you feel like it. So moving along, I'll just consult my notes on David. Now, this is David Matas. We're very privileged to have him here. He's a well-known human rights lawyer who's known for many human rights causes. He's been given the member of the Order of Canada in 2008. He's the author of 8 books, and he and David Kilgour, who is a former Canadian MP and a former Secretary of State to Asia, were nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize this year for their work related to the investigation of organ harvesting from Falun Gong practitioners in China. Both of the Davids are recipients of the 2009 Human Rights Award from the International Society for Human Rights, also in recognition of their work to end organ harvesting in China. Both the Davids have published 2 reports, and they've co-authored a book, Bloody Harvest, of which you've got a soft copy on your seats. The book details evidence that tens of thousands of Falun Gong practitioners have been killed by the Chinese regime in the process of extracting their organs for lucrative transplants surgeries. Since the publication of their reports, David Matas and David Kilgour have visited 44 countries to raise awareness of this genocide that is happening. Unfortunately, the world's governments, including Australia's, do not speak out about this. They try to hang on to every little snippet they can get from the Chinese Communist Party, such as passing new laws to stop organ transplants and the denials that the Chinese Communist Party have. And basically, we do need to raise more awareness of the fact that this is actually happening in China and is still happening right now as we speak. So we're privileged to have David here tonight, and I'd like to thank him in advance for speaking out for those who don't have a voice. So please welcome Mr. David Matas.
Okay, thank you very much. I see some people in this audience that I recognize, and I thank you for coming after having already heard me before. I am going to nonetheless start from scratch and assume everybody here knows absolutely nothing about what I'm talking about, although I know that for many of you that is not the case. And for those who know a lot of what I'm talking about, I hope you'll bear with me as I start from nothing and get up to speed, so to speak. I'm a lawyer, immigration, refugee, international human rights lawyer, practicing in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, and I've been doing that more or less all my career. And as a result of that, I know a lot about human rights violations around the world and international human rights law, and a lot of victim individuals and communities come to me about this and about that, and I try to help them as best I can, whatever the request is. But very often it's just talk to your MP, go to the media, talk to Amnesty International, file a petition at the UN, whatever. In May 2006, so I got a request to deal with the issue of the killing of Falun Gong with their organs that I felt I had to deal with in a more systematic fashion than just referring the people who came to talk to me to somebody else. In March 2006, a woman with a pseudonym Annie had made a statement in Washington, D.C. that her ex-husband between 2003 and 2005 in Sujiat and Shenyang in China had been harvesting the corneas of Falun Gong practitioners. And the other doctors in that hospital have been harvesting other organs that the Falun Gong practitioners were being killed in the process, their bodies were cremated. She made this statement in Washington, D.C., and I mean, I'd seen it through the news, and I'd noticed it at the time. The government of China had denied it, and I was, because of my refugee practice, familiar with the phenomenon of Falun Gong, and I knew this was a persecuted group in China, but I didn't think anything much other than that of the allegation. The Coalition to Investigate Persecution Against the Falun Gong, which is a non-governmental organization headquartered in Washington, D.C., then asked me and David Kilgore to investigate this allegation because there was a controversy as a result of the Chinese government denial, and was it true or was it not true? Now, this coalition, they didn't give us any money, they didn't give us any data, they didn't give us any directions, they just asked us. They offered to reimburse our expenses, but it was an offer I never took up, and after all, investigating and writing a report it's time-consuming, but it's not that expensive. David Kilgore is somebody I'd known through the years. He's, at that time, a retired parliamentarian. He'd spent his whole career as a member of Parliament, a member of the Canadian government, at one point a cabinet minister, and so the two of us agreed to do this. It was, and one of the reasons I agreed to do this was I could see that the institutions that I was familiar with, that were used to dealing with human rights, would have difficulty coming to grips with this issue. I mean, the allegation straight up was no bodies. I mean, the victims are gone, corpses cremated. So it's an allegation of mass murder without any bodies. No crime scene. I mean, the crime scene's an operating room, which is cleaned up after each operation. No witnesses. I mean, there's perpetrators and victims, but the perpetrators, from my experience, are unreliable witnesses, and of course the victims are gone. It's a closed operating room, so there's nobody just wandering around to see what would happen. It's a very compartmentalized operation. I mean, nobody goes through the whole system from the jail to the transplants, so nobody really sees everything. No records. I mean, there's records in Chinese hospitals, but I wouldn't have access to them. So, true, not true. How do you deal with it? And when I was asked to deal with this, as I said, I was given no direction, and I had no inclination, or if I had one, I guess it was to establish that it was not true, because I'd like to think better of humanity. But it was kind of an evidentiary or intellectual conundrum. How do you either prove or disprove an allegation like that? Now, to a certain extent, as a refugee lawyer, it's an issue that I'm better able to deal with than most, because very often I deal with clients who come to Canada in my office with nothing but the clothes on their back and say, this is what happened to me back home, and then as their lawyer I have to try to establish that this is so without any, at least to start off with, without any more evidence than just what they told me. And so, as I say, it's a kind of issue I was used to dealing with, and I knew that the human rights organizations, which I'd been very heavily involved with in the past, wouldn't touch it, because although Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, International Commission of Jurists, and so on have research capacity, they're not think tanks, they're not academic institutes. They're basically looking for something that's very obvious, immediate, easy to prove, verifiable, can be easily be corroborated, so that they can campaign around it. They're campaign organizations with sort of subsidiary research offices to substantiate what they're campaigning about, but they simply grind to a halt when an investigation needs to be sophisticated. So this was just something I could not realistically expect somebody else to do. So I said, okay, I'll give it a try. And so then I started to think about, well, how do you prove it? How do you disprove it? Let's think of avenues of proof, avenues of disproof. And David Kilgore and I started going down these different trails, trails of proof and trails of disproof. And there was a number of them that we constructed, dozens. The bottom line was that the avenues of disproof went nowhere. The bottom avenues of proof went somewhere. None of them produced what I would call a smoking gun, or what David Kilgore calls a smoking scalpel. But the accumulation of evidence, when put all together, led to the conclusion, which we formed, that this was indeed happening, that Falun Gong were being killed for their organs, not just between 2003 and 2005, which was what Annie was talking about, but from 2001 to the time our report came out, which was in July 2006. Not just in Sujiatan, but throughout China, not just for corneas, but for all organs. So that was our conclusion. And we did a first report, July 2006, a second report, January 2007, and a third version, November 2009. Each with more evidence, but all coming to the same conclusion. And the situation kind of changed on the ground, particularly for the 2009 version, so I'll talk a bit about that. But let me say a bit first about Falun Gong, for some of you who are not familiar with that. Falun Gong is a set of exercises with a spiritual foundation, which began in 1992 in China. At the time of this was after Tiananmen Square, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, after the disintegration of the Iron Curtain, and after the shift in China from socialism to capitalism. So there was kind of a lot of uncertainty and intellectual and ideological ferment in China at the time. And Falun Gong was both new and old. I mean, it was new in the sense that it hadn't existed before, but it was kind of a blending and updating of ancient Chinese traditions, the exercise traditions, Qigong traditions, the most famous of which is Tai Chi, as well as Buddhism and Taoism, and it kind of has elements or strands of all of them. So it's a set of exercises with a spiritual foundation. Now, what it's not is an organization. The Chinese government now calls it an evil cult. It's certainly not that, but it's not even an organization. It doesn't have membership or members. It doesn't have officers or offices. It doesn't have a bank account. There have been volunteers that have come together that have formed, within the Falun Gong community, a variety of different organizations. There's now a coalition to investigate persecution against the Falun Gong, the CIPFG. There's Falun Dafa associations in different countries. Now, all this organizational sort of subcomponent outgrowth was subsequent to the banning and didn't exist before. Falun Gong in 1992 started and then grew very quickly within China. It was encouraged by the government of China because it was an exercise regime, and it added to people's health, and the health system was under financial strain because the government was withdrawing money from the health system because of the shift from socialism to capitalism. It cut down on the bills to the health system, and so Li Hongji, who was the founder and teacher, was given some awards and encouraged, and Falun Gong grew very quickly. From a standing start in 92 to in 1999, the government had done a survey of various NGOs and their strength in Canada, or various movements and their strength in China, and they estimated that in 1999 the Falun Gong community was between 70 and 100 million people. At the time, when the membership of the Communist Party was 60 million people, and there was 3,000 practice stations in China. It was pervasive up and down the party. For instance, Zhu Rongji, who was the Prime Minister of China at the time, was encouraging Falun Gong, so it was a popular-based movement, and there was a lot of uncertainty and ideological pushback within the party. The leading opponents of Falun Gong were Lu Gan and Jiang Zemin, who basically felt ideologically threatened. This was a movement that, it was not political, but it was not communist. The Communist Party was atheist. This wasn't, I guess you could say, technically theist.